Welcome back to At the Table of Redemption podcast. We're in the At the Table with the Master series, where we explore ideas, practices, and wisdom that help leaders rise, rebuild, and reimagine what's possible in moments of crises. I'm your host, Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, and it is an honor to be here with you. Today's guest is my professor, Dr. Marshall Ganz.
Today, we are here to discuss his newest book, People, Power, Change, Organizing for Democratic Renewal. Today's episode is an excerpt from that interview that I'm calling a leadership redemption moment with Marshall Ganz.
So Professor Ganz, tell us what brings you to the table of redemption.
Well, you bring me to the table.
Okay.
No, your invitation, your work, your calling. And so I'm just really looking forward that learning from our conversation.
Thank you so much. Most people are going to want to know originally, how did we meet? How did Rasheen Jamison-Richardson get into the presence of Dr. Marshall Ganz or Professor Ganz? And at Harvard, you are Marshall. So
That's right. That's correct. Thank
for
you.
the rest of the interview, we're gonna be Marshall and Rasheen. We got
Excellent.
all the formal stuff out of the way.
No, that's good. That's really good.
Yes, so I just want to tell my listening and viewing audience how precious this moment is. I have to start with Siri Keller. That was my teaching fellow. And I also have to start with Lacey Conley. Those two individuals are so critical to the learning of the students that Marshall teaches, and I was one of his students. So in his class, I went there by way of Dr. Elizabeth City in the Graduate School of Education. And almost every podcast, you may hear me talk about Dr. Elizabeth City because I was sitting in her office telling her about the Leadership Redemption Framework. And we were always navigating, what should we take? What should we do?
That's
And
great.
Dr. Ganz and Marshall's name came up about getting into that course to be able to look at my work through the lens of redemption. And so it was such an honor to be there. It was also a challenge because each time I'm writing, you have to tell your story. It is not a class where you just get a chance to just go under the radar. You must perform. And as I performed, I healed. And as I healed, it's almost like I could see. And so I knew that when I got out of the course, this was a table that I wanted to have. I had a table in mind, but when I was in Marshall's class, it became the table of redemption, going over the redemptive bridge. So this podcast was born in his class. It was born in Liz City's desk. And this is a full circle moment because I did it. So, hey, Siri, hi, Lacey, and hi to my colleagues. So, Marshall, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I want to thank them too.
Yeah,
And because the word redemption is such a powerful word,
yeah,
and I don't think it's often given the focus that we need it to have. Because redemptive is like it's recovering source of life, of living and hope.
yeah.
And boy, do we need that in these times right now. I
Yes.
mean, big time. So I just appreciate your framing. You're framing the work in this way. And I also just want to say, I think music can be powerfully redemptive too.
Yes.
I've seen it because it speaks right to the heart and it enables connection and experience that words often don't. So, so you got a good calling here.
Thank you. Thank you for calling it a calling because it is truly that. It is truly that. And it's hard to be in academic spaces and use the word redemption, use the word calling. The framework I worked on for 20 years, and I named it that behind the scenes because it is a calling. And I
Yeah.
was really afraid to bring it into academic spaces. But when I was in your course and I saw it used, you have no idea how many cartwheels I did on the inside that I can use this word. And I have a credible source to add to it by practicing this thing. And I don't think I actually got what public narrative was until we got to that part. And I got a chance to work through the the comments that you guys would make on my paper. And I'm like, well, I can actually try this part on and it fits. And so
Yeah.
that's when I got really excited about being able to give myself permission to use it and also explore the many facets that it can take on and not keep putting it into a box. So your course is so powerful, and I needed my audience to have access to this quality of teaching and this quality of exposure to what redemption really means. So tell me, when you were creating a public narrative framework, how did you get to the redemptive bridge part? Why did you want to add that?
It's a very interesting question because I think, um, well, I think I got involved, excuse me, in organizing with the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964 when I was a junior at Harvard College and volunteered. And the project was to support the work of Black organizers in Mississippi who were getting put in jail, beaten, fighting for the right to vote. And the project was to support them in building something called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Mm.
Now, and I was drawn to that, I think for two reasons. One, um, my father was a rabbi, my mother was a teacher. We lived in Germany for 3 years after the Second World War,
Mm.
when a lot of his work was with survivors of what we now call the Holocaust. In fact, I was in Paris last week because my great uncle had gone there from Poland, but then was deported to Auschwitz, and we lost him. So it was a kind of a reality. But my mom she grew up in Virginia, and her parents were from the old country. They had a store outside the naval base in Norfolk. And she went to college. Those three girls. Not a lot of women were going to college then. But she got very clear about race. And I still don't understand exactly because what she was telling me was this is not just about anti-Semitism, it's about racism. And when you turn people into objects, you can do anything to them. So I'm grateful for that. The other thing, though, was that my father was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And what it meant was that he really wasn't available to me or to my mom. And I began to develop a lot of anger of having to show up every Friday night and be the good rabbi's kid when it was an act. And
Mm.
it was an act I had to fulfill. And it became more and more kind of suffocating. And I did bring my non-Jewish girlfriend to my bar mitzvah dinner. That was my
Okay.
act of protest. But
Okay.
yeah, but it developed, and as I began to meet the people with SNCC and with the other organizations in 63, 64, it was really very refreshing. In other words, it wasn't about meeting people I should feel sorry for. It was about meeting people who had courage, who'd found their voice and were fighting to make it heard. And, I often talk about the first SNCC staff meeting I went to, where I thought it was at Gammon Theological Seminary in Atlanta. And I thought there'd be all these charts and maps on the wall. They were having a preach-off.
Mm.
A preach-off, who could imitate Dr. King best? In
Okay.
other words, there was humor, there was joy in the struggle. How could you not want to be part of something like that? So the courage really is what drew me. And then what I found in Mississippi, that my main work, yeah, there were the marches and all that, but my main work was working with people, individuals and small groups who were struggling with this. How do I find the courage to assert my voice?
Yeah.
How do I find the courage to risk engaging with others? And the risks were very, very real. So it's sort of, that's kind of when I discovered what would be my calling.
Mm.
My mom, who was a teacher, she called herself an educator because the word education comes from Latin educare, and it means to draw out, not to put in. It's not
Mm.
about filling people's heads with stuff. It's meeting each person as holding potential for development, and your job being to facilitate that development. Well, that's what we were doing in organizing too. And so I got hooked on it. And yeah, I don't know if sometimes you look back over a period of years and say, oh, now I see what I was doing.
Yes.
Well, that's kind of, I had that experience with Rabbi Hillel's three questions that are fundamental. And we've just begun doing a course with a colleague here, Chris Robichaud, that we call Being Human. And it turns out that that's kind of at the core of a lot of what's kind of been my work over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so pivotal. That's a pivotal point in this dialogue because the way you were teaching us about building the empathetic bridge or building something, and just like music, you start at the root and go up. It is
Right.
back. What you did in the course was encourage us to strongly think about. These are my words. Think about what you're thinking about. And thinking about what you're thinking about was going back to your childhood, even going back as far as you can to
Yeah.
build this narrative because it's so painful, some of the traumatic things that we've gone through. And I think I shared with you in a class that my father was also a preacher and of the Pentecostal church. And I remember feeling the same way you were feeling about having to suppress my
Yeah.
feelings about seeing him in the pulpit one way, but then when we go home, there's
Oh boy.
also a life that happens behind the scenes.
Oh boy.
And how do you process that as a small child?
Really hard.
You just learn different tactics or different behaviors.
That's
And
right.
it was hard. It was just hard. And I'm the baby of 8 children. And
Woo.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Well,
so you see, so music became that way of offsetting or curtailing or yielding
yeah.
in a way that gave me my voice through music. And it also gave my siblings their voice through music, but the pain of what that was never really went away.
Yeah. It's there, but it's not driving you.
Yeah.
It doesn't own you. And
Yeah.
see, that's the difference. It's kind of when we allow that pain to own us,
Yeah.
then we are in desperate need of redemption,
Yes.
of recapturing the gift of life
Mm,
and the possibilities and the hopefulness that goes with it.
mm.
It's I really appreciate your sharing that. It's there's a saying in Spanish. They say "iluminación a la calle y oscuridad a la casa." It means the danger of being a light to the world but darkness at home.
Yes.
And that kind of names what I think we've both been talking about. And
Yeah,
but it's sort of like the music. It sounds like that became the language of your heart.
it did.
And how we feel about these things. I think in the class we're not just trying to get people to rethink, but to refeel,
Oh,
to
that's
allow
good.
themselves the emotional understanding of both the pain but also the hope. Because I mean, values are not abstract ideas, they're feelings. They're
Mm,
what we care for, where we get our hope. And if we suppress that because we say, oh no, it's all this logical whatever, we're suppressing one of the fundamental ways in which we can be human with one another, which is sharing our feelings.
yeah.
And that's what music is the language of.
Yes. It is. It is. And it is so refreshing that I can have this moment with you and with the listening audience to also give them permission to feel. And to feeling, the point of feeling is to explore. And the point of exploring is to now rewrite your narrative. And the thing about being in the course, and I know this is about the book talk, but there will be no book talk without the course having put in all the appropriate ingredients and all the nutrients to lay the foundation for the conversation we're getting ready to have. But the
Yeah,
big thing about the course is that it's repetitive. You when we're in the class, we have an opportunity to repeat. In the
Yeah,
repeating is the healing, and in the healing is the rediscovery of the voice. And I believe that once we kept rehearsing, practicing, being in the workshops, the real voice showed up. And
that's
all
right.
this time I'm thinking I had a real voice coming into your class. Voice of courage, voice of power, voice to get into Harvard, voice to sing. But the narrative, which by which I took courage to be on a podcast is
Yeah,
the healing, is the voice of healing.
yeah,
That without the singing, without all of theatrics, to sit in a space and utilize the voice as this source of power and healing from an
yeah.
authentic place. And that's the gift of being in your class.
Well, it's the gift of having the opportunity to learn with people
Yes.
who are taking these challenges for real. Because then it is what you said. It's there's a challenge when something is iterative, inherently iterative, like living life. I mean, but trying to teach it in a linear way. Like first you do this, then you do this. So unless it's iterative, you can't get what the whole thing is.
Yeah.
And so the repetition, it's a little bit more like a spiral than a circle because it's an upward kind of iteration. At least that's how I've come to think of it. And I think you described its significance very, very, very well. It's one reason why these old stories, they're still alive.
Yeah.
You know, the old stories, because the first way we started sharing information with one another once we had words was through telling stories. And often they were sung too, because it was about something so important, which was how we could develop the heart muscles
Yeah.
to deal with that for which we're not prepared, to deal with that which it could be threatening, but it could also be promising. But usually our default is our fear.
Yeah.
And so stories, that's what stories are all about. Um, I don't know if this is appropriate time, but an example that I find very helpful is comparing two moments. Um, I went with my partner to the seashore to watch the sunset. That was a beautiful sunset. Turned orange, turned pink. Great. That's moment number one. Moment number two, I went with my partner to the seashore, watched sunset. It was really beautiful. It turned orange and pink. But then it started to rain. I turned to go, but she reached out her arm, reached out and grabbed my arm. She said, "Wait a second, that's only rain. As long as we're together, we're good."
Wow.
See, now that's a narrative moment because what happened was there was a disruption, rain. I reacted fearfully. Got out of the rain. She reaches out to me in love and reinforces our relationship. And so the moral of the story is that love can conquer fear.
Mm.
All in that moment. That's the power of narrative
Mm.
because it is about speaking of emotion in challenges, hurts, hopes, and all of that stuff. And you don't do that through a model or some kind of argument. It's a different kind of communication.
Yeah.
And that's why redemption's at the heart of it. I mean, who of us does not need that kind of access to that kind of thing? I
Mm.
don't know. This may sound weird, but it's one reason I really get angry when they start taking the wolf out of children's stories
Mm.
because the whole point is the wolf. The whole point is developing the heart muscles to confront the wolf, not fearfully, but with courage and with imagination and possibility. And so when we get rid of the wolf, we're getting rid of the whole point. That makes sense?
It makes sense to me. I never thought of it that way, but a lot of it on another podcast guest is Dr. Steve Seidel, and he mentioned that a lot of in our podcast series, we were just basically talking about his work, qualities of quality, the quality of qualities, and how sometimes when you're trying to measure quality, the subjectivity that gets involved. And so, what he helped me do to be able to see what you're saying is to really relax a little bit in the way we look at how things are characterized and how things are positioned and repositioned. And when I'm thinking about what you're saying about those that are removing the wolf, you are so correct. I never thought about it in that way, how the heart muscles are not being as worked. And that means that it's fight or flight. That means we're removing the very part of the
Yeah.
child's brain that learns how to respond, that
Yeah,
learns how to be able to teach healthy fear from unhealthy fear.
that's right. No, it's exactly right.
Yeah,
And I mean, our faith traditions all work on that.
yeah.
I mean, we've been working on that thing, like I say, I mean, ever since people started using language,
Mhm.
because the motivation, the storytelling is how to live life, how to find a way to a life that is not a life of fear,
Mhm.
but a life of possibility,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know? And so it's really at the heart of, I think, being human.
Mhm. But the being human is a thing that is so critical to being a great listener and being a great person that can partake in someone else's suffering.
Right.
And when I wrote the Leadership Redemption Framework, and as I talked about it in my course with you, I was writing about how my job as a music teacher was cut and the disruption that was there,
Yeah.
and not knowing who to turn to, not
Yeah.
knowing how this would develop. And I end up inadvertently, what I call being provoked into being a community organizer by way of becoming the founder of Legacy School of Performing Arts. And it was the first time being in your course was the very first time in all of those years thinking about the paper trail that follows our narrative, thinking about the people that follow our narrative, thinking about the context that is impacted by when an interruption occurs. And the thing about working in the narrative space, my research background is in descriptive, meaning that it's narrative inquiry. But I had no idea how embedded it can be in the heart of a person as a living, breathing piece of DNA.
That's
And so
right.
I'm saying that because our listening audience needs to really capture the essence of what we are trying to communicate, that not only tell your story, but own it.
That's right.
And
That's
not
right.
only own it, but share it.
Yep.
And not be
Yep.
afraid to tell someone else what happened to you in narrative form.
You know,
And
and it's interesting. Well, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, I was going to ask you if you had anything to add.
No, I was just going to say that you know we often we fear becoming vulnerable to others, and so we put up walls. And the walls don't take away the fear. They just keep it in there. And so finding the courage to allow yourself to actually be seen in terms of what do you care for? Now, those can be painful moments. But the other question, I mean, if there weren't hopeful moments, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yes.
And so we have both in our experience, why we need to fix the world, but then the belief we could. And I think we get confused about hope when we think it's got to come from out there, when it really is, its roots are much more in our own lived experience. And yeah, that's why it's so ancient.
Mm.
That's why Bible stories are still good stories to tell.
Yes.
That's why, when Jesus is teaching his apostles, the last thing he teaches them and that have the hardest time with is the parables.
Mm.
He starts with the healing. He starts with the relational, but the parables, they're sort of struggling a bit. But that's what makes it real in the world is those stories.
Mm.
And yeah, this is an ancient deal. This is not from yesterday.
It is not. It is not. And you are so true. Um, you know, when we think about those Bible stories. I was just reading in Mark chapter 4, even how he was just saying, why in the world can't you get this? I'm telling you about the light. I'm telling you about
Right.
the seed of the sower. I'm telling you about it's broad open daylight. But the thing I like about our dialogue is the diversity.
Yeah.
And I think that's how people are going to get the message of redemption, that
It's
it's
good.
not just a spiritual practice and it's not just a narrative, it's whatever you want it to be. Just show up. If you can just show up, I think you could be able to move forward in this thing. One of the things I want to transition to is the fact that we can talk about this, but I wanted to come into your class to give my framework some legs and give it some hands
Yeah.
and get a language that I can then transfer to another population. So
Yeah.
based on me being in Project Zero Classroom with Howard Garner, I was able to kind of like pattern a framework after his. So I have domains. And so after the research, it becomes resilient science, that this person that we are talking to is that we're trying to get to show up to the redemption is resilient. The person we're trying to get up to show up to this conversation is those who are in need of leadership preparation, and narrative is a strong form to be able to prepare you and to help keep you grounded in your story. And then trauma informed recovery, and then healing centered flourishing. So those are the domains, and that's how I built this entire podcast and framing it around what is it that we need now, not just what was, but the times that we're in now. Do you have any definition that you want to share on what you believe resilience really is?
See, I associate it with hope,
Okay.
but not flowers in May.
Okay.
I think there's a big difference between hope and optimism. I think that, you know, especially in times like we're in right now, to think that you can predict the future. In other words, the optimist says it'll be okay. The pessimist says it'll be bad. How do you know? We don't have knowledge of the future.
Mhm.
And so it's arrogant in a sense to make those claims, or it's a false comfort. Now, the 12th century philosopher Maimonides had an understanding of hope that I have found so helpful, because what he taught was that hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. In
Hmm.
other words, it is always probable Goliath will win, but sometimes David does.
Ooh.
It was improbable we'd elect a black man president of this country in 2007, but it happened. In other words, hope lives, it's the place between fantasy and certainty. It's a domain of could be, the domain of possibility. And that's the domain of imagination. That's a domain of creative strategy. All that's in that domain. And so enabling ourselves and each other to experience that. And I think, like I was saying, when we look for it out there in some great leader or some 10-year plan, we're missing the point, because the place to look is within
Yeah.
and within each other to generate the creative power that we need to deal with the kind of circumstances we're in.
Mhm.
And so it isn't a false certainty. Sometimes we're so anxious about uncertainty that we say, no, 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 it's all this.
Mm.
No, it's all that. But nothing in life is all this and all that. It's false, and we use it as a way to try to free ourselves from the anxiety. But it's not helpful because it's always bits of both. And that's where developing the capacity to articulate, to share, to express, that's what we need to be doing. I mean, because nobody can predict what the hell's, excuse me, happening here. I used an expletive there, but
Mhm.
no, I mean, you can't.
Mhm.
But what we need to be doing is preparing ourselves
Mhm.
to recognize opportunity, preparing ourselves to handle the pain
Mhm.
so that we become sources of not just resilience, but also creativity.
Mm.
Uh, because that's our gift. That's a gift we've been given as a species. We can be creative. Wow, that's quite a deal.
It is quite a deal. And even your sensitive was on par
Oh
because
yeah, my
it
bad
was
word.
it was because I grew up just believing hell it embodies the people who got the truth too late.
Huh,
You got that
that's,
just a little too late,
that's
you know.
interesting.
So to me, it all works. Whatever you're saying works
That's
because
cool.
what I think the big thing that your book, your book is trying to get people to see, hey, this, you can do this. Like
That's that's
it
right.
used to be so big. It used to be the big I and little you. But when I read your book, it's like you can do this.
That's right. That's
Even if it's a dime size, quarter size, I don't care how big or small it is, there's something that you can do. And so we're trying to navigate this entire podcast that by the end of the podcast, someone can see themselves getting the book, getting up off the couch and getting out the door to
yeah.
see yourself organizing and creating a movement out of whatever you're working on. One of the things I love most about when you talked about resilience is the component of hope. I never thought about it like that. Most people are thinking about stressors. They're thinking about
Yeah.
I am Shiro, hear me roar. They're thinking about something so grand. But one of the things I love about your book and about your course is it levels the playing field. It just keeps everything, I call it even Steven, so that you can find yourself in doing something about what it is you care so deeply about. Do you feel the same way, or what do you feel about trauma informed recovery? Because a lot of organizing, a lot of creating movements is going against the grain. It's going against, what's on the market or what's popular or what's certain. What are your thoughts on trauma informed recovery?
Well, I think everyone has pain in their lives.
Mhm.
And at times the pain consumes us.
Yeah.
At other times we recognize the pain, but it doesn't eat us. It doesn't own us.
Mm.
And I think I don't know, I'm just thinking how to distinguish because you know, people some of the people I work with have been doing a lot of work with recovery in um, in Kenya,
Yeah.
in Ghana, in Pakistan, um, and it's worked with women for the most part. And it's very much about, yes, dealing with trauma, but in a way that is about building future. In other words, when you say healing, it's sort of not, I think one of the problems we have is when we look at everything that we're afraid of rather than what we want. Now, I'm going to use a political example here because Zoran Mamdani's campaign in New York was really exceptional. You heard much less about Trump because it wasn't, how do we stop this? How do we stop this? How do we get rid of this? It was no. How do we get education for our kids? How do we get a place to live? In other words, the things that we want, the things that we want to create. So there's a balance between, I think, pain and hope. There's a balance between um, fear, fear and hope that's there. And what a lot of people that I've worked with have found is the narrative work can be really helpful
Mm.
in that because it doesn't end with the trauma.
Mm.
It for many people it starts there, but it's also about recovery, not of the outside, but the inside.
Yeah.
And that to me is kind of where the power is. And that's what makes it redemptive. And but I've learned a lot from the work folks have been doing in places of where people have been pretty badly hurt.
Mm.
Uh, but when the other thing is that it doesn't happen alone. this stuff is not solo operation. It's with others because we're relational creatures. We're not solo performers. I mean, we never have been. And the difference between it's almost like 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 10. Because once we are actually in a relational work with someone, then we become generative in a way that by ourselves it's hard.
Mm,
And and that's the other part I think about the narrative work, that it is from the very get-go, the learnings with another person. You're learning with a coach, you're learning with other people, you're teaching each other. And so it's a discovery of value that we have within ourselves um, with others. I mean, sometimes we don't see value in ourselves that others do.
mm,
And so there's a whole dimension of interdependence and teaching and learning that to me is part of the redemptive process.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I believe that when you talk about the trauma and you talked about the recovery piece and the informed piece, it's all spliced up in ways that when you talk about it, it comes together as one, making us see inside of us. Because
That's right.
in the arts, I always would tell my students, you are listening externally at someone else's notes, you're watching their choreography, but you fail to believe that you can do it, but you're around it. And the arts can be one of those gifts, but it can also be a curse of imitation and not owning who you are and owning your entire talent.
Why,
So
that's true.
you see that?
It's
So
not imitate. No, go ahead.
yeah, you get it. So sometimes we have to extract some stuff out. Sometimes we have to weed some stuff out and help people wade through their narrative about themselves in hoping that one day, with or without the teacher, with or without the leader, they stand on their own 2 feet or use their own voice and believe that it can change and move mountains.
And I guess just 2 points about that. One is rarely is that a solo operation.
Yeah.
It occurs with others, or it occurs with the coach, or it occurs with a friend. It's just because we are all, it's that riddle. We all are fish in the water of our own stories.
Yes.
And another person who has interest and is not trying to con us or use us, it's almost essential
Yeah.
to be able to see what we don't see because we're wrapped up in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I think it's relational. You can't just stare in the mirror and get it because there's all the stuff you don't see because you're in the midst of it. And
Mm.
that's where others can be so helpful because they can help us see what we're not seeing.
Yeah.
And it's not, how can I say, it's not putting things on us that are not ours.
Mhm.
It's much more enabling to see more fully what is ours.
Mhm.
But that's a relational thing. That's not a solo deal. At least in my experience, it's how it's been. Yeah, I think no, this is it's such fundamental stuff. I had another point I was going to make, but it'll come back. My mom would say, "Oh, it must have been a lie if you forgot." No, 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 but the stuff we're talking about is just so important and it's so fundamental, and it's so the world is in so much need of it, so much need right now.
Yes, yes,
No, look, it's been a joy to have this conversation. Really,
yes.
I so appreciate your energy,
Thank you.
and really, no, it's inspiring. Really, you have a lot of joy in you too.
Thank you, Marshall.
You do, you know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So my closing question is, Marshall, what are you leaving the table of redemption with today? We know how you came to the table, but how are you leaving the table of redemption today?
Well, I think the fruit of our conversation is, I when I was saying that there's a lot of joy in you.
Mhm.
For me, it generates uh, deeper understanding, deeper commitment, deeper willingness to risk, and deeper appreciation of what we can be to each other and with each other. So for me, it's like, yeah, it's inherently redemptive.
Yeah. Gosh. So what words of encouragement do you have for me as I continue on in this particular journey I'm on?
Well, I was going to say in Spanish, si se puede. No, but see, I think you have those words written on your heart. And I think it's in the form of music. I think it's your experience as a PK, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, with all its complexity about it. And I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really important. And so I just want to, how can I say, wish you well
Thank you.
and Godspeed. But I want a commitment to keep me posted on how you're doing.
I sure will. You got that. You got that commitment. I would definitely do that. It has been such a pleasure and an honor to be in your presence. It has been such a dream come true to even take your course. But as it was even more of a pleasure to learn from those you train, like Siri and Lacey and all the
Yeah,
TFs, because their work is so meaningful, connecting to us at times when you might not be able to, and to be able to just have that love and that access. It was so important to me to be with your teaching team
yeah,
as they doing all they can to carry out your mission. So thank you for that. We're closing the table of redemption today. I always leave the table saying, I sure hope that you've been well fed at this table. I sure hope that you ordered what you want. I hope that you ordered your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, your change. I hope that you're understanding that you have a movement in you and asking yourself, well, why am I not moving? So as we continue to inspire change in you, we want to ask you, so what brings you to the table of redemption? I am your host signing off, Rasheen Jamison-Richardson. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Marsha.
you. I was going to say there's a Mexican saying, panza llena, corazón contento. It means with a full belly, the heart is happy.
Yay!
And so that's kind of like,
Well, there you have it. You just tuned in to a Leadership Redemption Moment with me and Marshall Ganz. Please stay tuned to the episode where we do the book talk strictly on people power change.